I said I'd love to walk through the hills for a segment. They said, first work your legs here, which is exactly what I'm doing, while someone else is breathing fresh mountain air in Himachal.
We're at 12,000 feet on the top of a pass in the Himalayas. It's bitterly cold, and as you've noticed, it's snowing. What in the world are two maniacs doing out here? Well, that's a long story.
Our story begins with the little Himachali hamlet of Bathad, high up in the Himalayas. Vikramaditya Bhagat and I are old college friends who share a liking for the outdoors and cross-country running. That's where the similarity ends. He's now a lawyer, and if his girth is a reflection of the state of his career, I'd say he's doing pretty well. He needed a little prodding to take time off and accompany me on this journey. Unfortunately for me, he brought his sarcasm and ludicrous sense of humor along. Unfortunately for both of us, and for Murray and Richard, two Swiss tourists who'd arrived in Bathad to trek in the area, unseasonal rain forced us to take shelter in the local post office while we waited for the weather to clear up. Bhagat attempted to liven things up by insisting on reading to us from a book he had brought with him from home, much to the amusement of the Swiss and to my disgust.
Nikhil, you must hear this quote. It says, "He that is a traveller must have the back of an ass to bear all, a tongue like the tail of a dog to flatter all, and the mouth of a hog to eat what is set before him." What do you think of that quote?
With the clouds showing some signs of clearing, we decided to take a chance and start walking. As far as I was concerned, anything was better than being cooped up in a post office listening to Bhagat. At this point of the trek, we had been walking for almost an hour, and yet we were only a few hundred meters from Bathad. The strain of walking uphill with heavy loads on our backs had just begun to tell. It had become obvious to me that we weren't as physically fit as we were in college, a fact that seemed to take longer to sink into Bhagat. He seemed intent on setting a furious pace. I was happy, just trudging along behind him. At the end of our second hour, we decided to stop for a while. Bhagat, the more extroverted amongst the two of us, decided to chat up one of the villagers outside whose house we had stopped.
नमस्ते भाई साहब।
नमस्ते।
बस ले जा रहे हैं हम। कितनी दूर है?
6 किलोमीटर जी।
मौसम कैसा चल रहा है ऊपर भाई साहब?
मौसम तो ऐसी बारिश लगी ऊपर से।
चलो हम ऊपर कोशिश कर रहे हैं। नमस्ते।
Having rested and regained a little of the energy we had lost on the steep climb, we started out again and decided not to stop before lunch. Half an hour into our renewed assault of the mountain, we caught up with Richard and Murray. Time to take another break, we told ourselves.
We just started to sweat.
So you had lunch before starting or empty
Sure,
stomach?
sure.
Dal and rice?
Yes.
Richard and Murray are alpinists, which basically means they trapeze up and down the steep Swiss Alps with minimum gear, which also obviously means that physically they are very fit. Having seen our very own fitness freak, the portly Vikram Bhagat, huffing and puffing up the mountainside, Richard told him he'd never make it to the pass that day. Although Bhagat was ready to take on the Swiss challenge, I decided that discretion was the better part of valor. And so we headed down to a village we had spotted in the distance to stop for the night. It was late afternoon by the time we reached the village. Lucky Ram, the village headman, invited us home for tea. Lucky Ram told us that the village was gearing up for the annual village mela or fest, and that we were welcome to join the villagers in their celebration. By the time we walked down to the main village square, a troupe of local folk dancers had begun doing their thing. The villagers stood around lethargically, an audience waiting to be seduced by the performers. As the tempo of the music picked up, the mood around the square changed perceptibly. The crowd began to get a little boisterous, and the more adventurous amongst the villagers began to join the circle of dancers. And then the inevitable happened. Bhagat and I, who had been watching the proceedings with an amused look on our faces, found ourselves being dragged into the circle. The next morning, we set off again. Bhagat's spirit seemed to have been lifted by the frenetic dancing of the night before, and he was eager to prove Richard wrong by walking straight up to the pass. No breaks, he declared, quite emphatically. I decided to offer him some unsolicited advice.
You know what the secret is?
What?
You have to conserve energy.
Conserving energy is just one aspect of trekking in the great outdoors. Enjoying yourself is supposed to be another. But when you have to trudge up and down hillsides in foul weather, a heavy load on your back, and very little food to eat, you often end up asking yourself the obvious question.
You may ask, what is the use of trekking? Well, the answer to that is quite simple actually. It is of no use. But it's the joy of the mountains, the clean fresh air, the struggle, the adventure that brings maniacs like us to places like this.
The rain had slowed us down yet again and had postponed for the time being Bhagat's relentless march to the pass. We decided to use the bad weather as an excuse to stop for lunch. Our feast consisted of 2 parathas each that were now almost 2 days old. For company, we had an old shepherd who was also looking for shelter from the rain. 2 hours later, the rain hadn't stopped. It was obvious that we were going to have to make another unscheduled halt for the night. Bhagat decided to vent his frustration by reading out aloud from his book. I tried to drown him out with my harmonica, but to no avail.
Those who have struggled with them, the mountains reveal beauties they will not disclose to those who make no effort. That is the reward the mountains give to effort, and it is because they have so much to give and give it so lavishly to those who will wrestle with them that men love the mountains and go back to them again and again.
As for me, I am not coming back.
Overnight, the unseasonal rain had given way to snow. And at first, we were quite excited at the prospect of walking through it all the way to the pass. The excitement didn't last too long. Our footwear was woefully inadequate, and within 10 minutes of starting out, I felt a strange searing numbness seep through my toes and inch its way up my body. To make matters worse, your feet tend to sink into fresh snow, and this makes walking much tougher. After many hours of plodding and stumbling through snow, we were forced to set up our tent just below the pass to escape from a blizzard that had set in. When the weather had cleared sufficiently, we decided to press on. But first, the tent had to be pulled down and repacked, a task that's easier said than done in sub-zero temperatures. Well, so here we are, on the pass at last. Bhagat's thrilled he's proved Richard wrong. I wouldn't be surprised if in his mind he's begun planning another trek, another mission impossible. As for me, my feet are so cold and numb, I couldn't wiggle my toes even if I tried. But in retrospect, I wouldn't have missed this trek for anything in the world.
So that's the end of this week's Great Escape. I'll see you next week on location. Well, hopefully.